Hey, Jess.
Hey, Nikki.
I am so excited to have you here today.
I'm
Uh,
excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
oh, it's a pleasure. I saw some of the stuff you've got going on and I got so excited about it and was like, hey, Jess, I don't know if this is your email. I don't know if this is the right email, but we need to talk. We need to talk about everything going on in your life right now. So I'm very grateful for you being willing and trusting me this early in the process. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
For sure.
So I'm thinking we start this conversation just getting to know you and your journey. I know obviously you and I went to school together, so we have some of those wonderful formative years in common, but
Mm-hmm.
there's been so many things that you've been up to, and I'd love to hear what aspects of your journey led you to where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. I'll just start at the very beginning. I grew up in a tiny town in Massachusetts that no one has ever heard of before. It's literally in the woods. Came from a pretty standard family, mom, dad, older brother, younger sister. I would say the one unique thing about my upbringing is that I was homeschooled starting in fourth grade. And so that was a pretty formative part of my experience and probably when my sense of otherness started kicking in.
Hmm.
Um, then I went to college at Bentley, where I met you, and studied management, made a lot of bad decisions, desperately tried to fit in and never quite succeeded in my own estimation, and then graduated a semester early and moved to New Hampshire to start working for a strategy consulting firm up there. I was there for 4.5 years, and to be honest, I still feel stressed out when I think about my time there. The culture of that organization was to break you down, strip you of your humanity, and then build you back into a veritable machine. And I view that time in two very divergent ways. The first is it was a very intense kind of hands-on MBA where I was thrown into situations where I had to sink or swim. And through that, realized that I could make something out of nothing. I was entrusted at a very young age, like 22, 23, to create strategies for Fortune 100 companies and then present those strategies along with my research to the senior leadership of those companies. I learned a lot of technical skills in that time that I've carried with me and have really benefited my career. But on the other hand, I also feel that I surrendered my values and integrity in exchange for success and affirmation. And I would say that I was genuinely the worst version of an Enneagram 3, which is what I am, and we'll talk about more in a bit.
Yes, I'm excited to hear more about that.
Yeah, during that time, I was really the worst version of myself. So then I met my now husband. We got married, and 3 days after our wedding, we moved to the San Francisco Bay Area because he is in the Coast Guard and got transferred out here. And that consulting firm offered me a promotion to director and said you can work remotely from the Bay Area and continue on with us. And I was like, thanks, but absolutely not. This is a very clear breaking point. It's not me, it's you, and it's time we go our separate ways. At that point, I had been working in the healthcare industry and the consulting work I was doing, and I really enjoyed that. So when I realized Kaiser Permanente was one of the largest employers in the Bay Area, I applied there, started working as a strategy consultant. That was an interesting experience because I was the only employee in my department who didn't have an MBA. And so I felt really lucky that they hired me, but assumed that I would have to get an MBA before getting promoted. And that just wasn't the case. My internal client ended up recruiting me into a promotional opportunity, less than 2 years after I started. So I started working for him, and at first it was great. He gave me a ton of responsibility, really affirmed my value add, which for an Enneagram 3 is like crack. We want all the affirmation. But then he kept giving me more and more and more work, and my anxiety started growing and growing because I personally felt like the quality of my work was slipping because I had too much to do. And it was funny because in one of my mid-year reviews, he gave me this feedback that you have really high expectations of yourself and other people. You're a perfectionist and you process really quickly and end up leaving other people behind. And my response was, what's your point? That's why I'm so good at my job. I don't see the problem here. But in hindsight, I don't think that he even realized the profundity of what he was saying and how that was so accurately describing my negative propensities as an Enneagram 3. So after that, he continued to give me more work, and I was really drowning drowning and anxiety, and I started having panic attacks. And then I had this very disorienting experience where I started shutting down and becoming really unmotivated and doing the bare minimum and getting distracted, which is really antithetical to everything that I had always known to be true about myself. And I started thinking, is this just who I am now? Am I just an unmotivated piece of crap that wants to like exclusively work from home and secretly nap during the day? Like it was very disconcerting and very disorienting. So at the same time, I had this opportunity to help my husband, who is a cook, cater 2 events. One of them was a wedding. And it was a really eye-opening experience of realizing that you can add value to people's lives in a different way than I had been groomed to add value, which was be competent, be smart, do a bunch of work, make other people's lives easier. And instead, being able to create a beautiful meal that literally nourished another person and have them give you the instant feedback that that was the best meal that they've ever had. It was a different kind of high for me. So that experience combined with the panic attacks had me rethinking my whole life trajectory and like, gosh, there's got to be more to life than endless meetings and PowerPoint and anxiety, right? So at that point, I decided to leave not just my job, but the corporate world in general. And at that time, I didn't think that I would ever go back. It seemed like the corporate world really rewarded the unhealthiest parts of me. They got value out of me losing myself. So started working for my church as the assistant to the lead pastor, which is a completely crazy thing for me to do on paper. And I was really nervous to tell people about it for fear that they would judge me and think, why the heck would you do that? But instead, what I found is that the general consensus, even from really seasoned leaders, was that they all had reached a point in their life where they were presented with an opportunity to do something that they were passionate about, and they all chose the safe route, and they have regretted it ever since.
Ooh, that just gave me chills.
So they were super affirming, and they were like, we're so proud of you for making this decision. And that was really helpful for me in being able to move forward confidently, or maybe a little less insecurely than I was previously. So worked for the church for about 2 years. And during that time, it was one of the most transformative experiences that I've ever had, where I was almost exclusively focused on self-care for the first time in my life. I was, going to therapy on a weekly basis, and basically every encounter that I had on staff was like a mini therapy experience. And it resulted in me re-examining everything that I had believed to be true and discarding the things that were no longer true, and really redefining my own values, re-owning my own faith, and not just believing the things that I was told that I was supposed to believe my whole life. And through that experience, I launched a life coaching practice for women as kind of a side hustle to help others overcome their self-limiting narratives. And also because people were always coming to me for advice and a kick in the pants, why not monetize that?
So smart.
So then after 2 years of working for the church, there unfortunately was a bit of a leadership implosion, which resulted in like half the staff leaving, including myself. And that was kind of a traumatic experience. But at the same time, fortuitously, I had been approached by an old colleague from Kaiser about a position that she was hiring for to manage a brand new program. So I ended up coming back to KP in what ended up being my dream job, in my dream department with my dream team. It's truly a role that aligns my skills, experience, values, passion, and I get paid for it. So it was like, whoa, I didn't even know that that was a thing.
Right? You're like, all right, where's the trick here? Oh, there isn't? Great. This is amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And my boss is such an incredible human that she embraced my obsession with Enneagram, and she let me lead a day-long workshop for our department and another department that then has resulted in just more and more opportunities coming my way for teaching about the Enneagram, doing one-on-one coaching, etc. And I'm really excited about that. And it's just been kind of a natural progression that has come out of my passion and my insistence on talking about it. And other people have really found value in that. So I feel very grateful to be doing many things that I feel passionate about at this current point in time.
Yeah. First of all, I feel like I need to meet this amazing boss at your job that's giving you that opportunity. That's truly incredible. My body's all hot and excited for you because I like the dream job, dream department, dream team. Come on, that is the holy grail that people are looking for. So that's just truly beautiful. I'm going to pull back 1 second because I know at least very, very basic knowledge about the Enneagram, but I'd love to hear, just like we're going into kindergarten class and we're doing a very 101 of what is the Enneagram, what's it about, and then we can dive into some more complexities. And then I would love if you can add on to that, just talking about, I know you mentioned a couple times type 3, Enneagram 3, and how that encompasses a lot of the negative propensities you were talking about in that job that pretty much made you a robot, and then how the wonderful, beautiful aspects have flourished in this dream place right now. So I'd love to hear just a little bit of a 101 there.
Yeah, for sure. So Enneagram, at the very basic level, it's Greek for 9. Ennea means 9, and then gram means something written or drawn. So Enneagram actually refers to the 9-pointed symbol that is associated with it. And at the most basic level, people typically describe it as a personality typing system, but that's not entirely comprehensive, or it's not an entirely holistic description, because personality from like a psychological perspective is made up of your behavior and your characteristics. But the Enneagram goes a step beyond that and actually identifies what your core beliefs and motivations are. So it more describes your ego structure. What are the things that you believe to be true about yourself? What are the things that you believe to be true about how others perceive you? How do you want other people to perceive you? So what's your idealized self-image? It describes 9 different archetypes of human beings and the way that we all show up in the world and the coping strategies and defense mechanisms that we've put in place to, make the world show up in the way that we need to. I guess that's not really kindergarten language, but that's
all right. That's all right. I'm nodding my head a lot, so I'm feeling like a kindergartner in all the right ways at this point. So I feel like my experience with the Enneagram was actually something that my coach that I work with had me do early on. I have done MBTI and I've done DISC assessments and I've done a lot of the assessments that are, I guess I would use quote unquote personality tests. And so when she mentioned to me, okay, I'm going to have you check this out, I was like, okay, cool. I know my, ENFP, ENFJ, I got it. I get myself. And she gave it to me, and it's not a crazy long test, and it's also relatively easy to take. You don't have to do much work in it, but the result, when I had the results sent to me, and obviously they're 43 pages or something like that, it was, it was like somebody had reached into my soul, into parts of me that I hadn't even allowed myself to see or understand, and just was like, oh, here's a flashlight. You want to take a look at this? And it was beautiful. And there were a lot of tears. And I immediately sent it to my mom and was like, does this sound like me? This sounds like me to me. And she felt the same way. And it's crazy to be able to do that type of self-exploration. So tapping into, and I know I mentioned this earlier, but the type 3 part of that, how in your journey of learning about Enneagram, but then taking yourself through it, how does that play out?
Yeah, so I first learned about it when I was on staff on the church, because it was a framework and a means of understanding each other that was really, highly valued and implemented on a daily basis. So when I read the overview of a type 3, similar to you, it described me so uncannily, and particularly what happens to a 3 when they're under an extended period of duress, which is that they shut down and stop being productive, and they are basically like a waste of time and space. It was fascinating and, to be honest, so relieving, because I realized that I was not actually that person at my core. I was still the productive, motivated leader type person that I had always known myself to be, but had just been in a circumstance that brought out the not great parts of myself. And so because it resonated so deeply, I tipped headfirst into this rabbit hole of learning everything that I could, and then forcing every single person in my life to learn about their type as well, to the point where if anybody new comes into our circle, like if a friend is dating a new person, they bring them to me and they're like, you must talk to Jessica about what your Enneagram type is, basically before you can sit with us.
That's amazing.
But But yeah, so I've done MBTI and DISC and StrengthsFinder and all those things. And the personality typing system perfectly describes what they are, because they say, these are your behaviors and your characteristics. This is generally how you show up in the world and how people experience you, but it doesn't tell you why. And therefore, it doesn't give you a path to growth. And that's the thing that I love about the Enneagram so much, is that one, it acknowledges that human beings are dynamic. We are not static. We can go from unhealthy to average to healthy in the span of like 30 seconds, and certainly over time. And when we are in periods of stress or in periods of health, naturally other parts of ourselves come out. And the Enneagram really accounts for that. And it doesn't put you in a box. And I would say some people, when they think about doing assessments like this, their greatest fear is getting put in a box. But one of my favorite Enneagram teachers, his name is Ian Morgan Cron, he says the Enneagram doesn't put you in a box. It shows you the box you're already in and shows you how to get out of it. And so that growth path is really the primary benefit from my perspective of the Enneagram. It's like, how can you transcend these habituated ways of being that are really self-limiting and move into a more expansive way of being?
Incredible. Can you imagine if in every performance review, that was the approach to whatever aspect of your performance you were talking about? That it wasn't just, here's what happened in this last year, 6 months, but it was also, here's what happens. Here's why I think maybe it's happening. Let's talk a little bit about it. And here are the ways we can dial up this and who you are and how you're presenting, and dial down this part for us to operate really well together.
Ooh, totally. I love that you said that too, because that is literally how I manage my team. They don't have a choice except to know their Enneagram type and the ways that it's limiting them and helping them to move forward. So that's a totally astute point.
It's funny. So my sister came on as my intern, and one of the things I had told her was, so this is the decision I'm making, that I want to, it's a language that I feel like I'm speaking, and I want to make sure that we can speak this language together of understanding Enneagram types that we are, where and how we show up in stressful situations, in healthy and unhealthy dynamic, because we don't have that language right now. And being able to operate fluently in that space. And obviously, again, as you mentioned, we're learning and growing and learning the language a little bit more deeply and having the slang come into it, as you do with language. But yeah, it's a beautiful thing that is filling that gap that I feel like we have in, not just in work, right? So in personal relationships, like you mentioned with your friend dating circle, that's amazing. That you're like, oh, you're new here? Come on, let's have a chat. There's some beauty in the idea that what if we could use our magic wand and have everybody come to this understanding that we aren't in this box. There's some fluidity there. And there are constructs that have guided us in certain ways. But hey, we have the room to be dynamic. We have the room to grow, and we can connect even if we're different.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the Enneagram is an invitation to curiosity, because we all walk around with our own view of the world, and we assume that everybody else views the world in the same way that we do. And when they behave in a way that is inconsistent with what we believe are our shared values, it can be really disorienting, and you have to almost assume malintent.
Right.
But when you realize that actually there are several, and the Enneagram would purport that there are 9, different ways of viewing the world, and they're all equally valid, then it helps to remove this judgment and these assumptions and these stories that we make up about ourselves and other people, and leaves more room for curiosity and compassion.
I am doing the silent snap that you do at poetry readings or whatever. I'm like, yes, this is truly beautiful. It felt like when you started posting that you were doing Enneagram work and started this beautiful, and I find extremely funny, Instagram handle, Enneagram for the People, it was taking this, what felt like a secret covert language that I was living with, and this magic nugget that I was operating and seeing the world from, and took it to a place where it could be so incredibly relatable. You talk a little bit about why you chose to go the route of this Instagram page, and talk a little bit about, I mean, I know it's memes and the like, but talk a little bit about what it is, why you decided to kind of go that take, because I think it's genius.
Yeah, thank you. So my Instagram for me is two primary things. One, it's my creative outlet. I mean, I personally like to laugh and I like to make other people laugh. And I never post a meme unless I personally think that it's funny.
Yeah.
So I think that we can take ourselves too seriously. I, in particular, am prone to that. And so this is my way of just being like, let's just be real about the fact that we're all a little bit neurotic, and that's okay. But the second thing is that it's me dipping my toe in the water, putting myself out there in a fairly low stakes and semi-anonymous way while checking my understanding of the unique nuances of each type. So if I put a meme out there and it doesn't really get a lot of likes and comments, I know that my understanding of that particular thing isn't quite 100%. Because when I put a meme out there that really does resonate and it gets tons of feedback, that means that it's resonating. There's something about that nuance of that particular type that I've hit home. So it's kind of like organic real-time research for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It also, in a sick way, feeds my Enneagram type 3 narcissism, where I'm looking for external validation. And so it can be like both a very healthy and productive thing for me, but honestly can also be very unhealthy. And at times, like for a whole day, I'll just delete my Instagram app from my phone so that I stop checking it.
I know. Well, you know what? I think that I think there are studies out there now of just the addiction that we've all created, right? So yeah, okay, the feeding of narcissism, sure, but there's also this societal, I'm going to sound dramatic here, societal epidemic of us just being addicted to that instant gratification. And did you like it? What'd you say? How many likes did I get? And the valuation of like what you're doing based on that stuff. So I think that there's something so genius about being like, I'm just going to remove it from my life right now. So I can't be drawn back into it.
Yeah, it's actually a dopamine hit that happens in your brain when you see a like or a comment, fundamentally rewiring your brain. It's actually very dangerous. And there's tons of studies out there around how social media has created an epidemic of depression and anxiety, particularly amongst teens, and has increased the suicide rate exorbitantly. So it's a really scary thing when it's used for that purpose and not for the building up of people. Societies.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to the Enneagram side of this, right? That if you have the ability to understand your type or the aspects of yourself that are not on the surface, you can think a little bit more distantly about why that dopamine hit is doing what it's doing and give you a little bit more agency around that experience. Yeah, maybe it's happening, but to be aware of, and even you joked about it, right? Like it's feeding that. I know it's going to happen, whatever, but like I see it, it's happening. I'm going to keep going. Whereas it sounds like in these studies, a lot of folks, they're not able to kind of be that fly on the wall of their life to see back and say, ooh, okay, this is controlling me more than I'd like, or I can identify it and see how it fits in my life in ways that feel a little bit more healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as an example of that for me, when I posted a series of haikus for each Enneagram type, and I had to coach myself before I posted it to say, I personally believe that these haikus are accurate representations of each type and what each type needs to hear. And even if I get 0 likes or comments, I can rest in knowing that I had integrity in building this particular post. And that's enough. And I don't do that every time, but for that one in particular, because it felt a little bit more vulnerable to put myself out there in that way, I had to say, whatever happens, I know I'm affirming myself. I'm validating myself, and I don't need that external validation or affirmation on this one.
That's beautiful. I don't know if you watch Oprah. She has these super soul sessions and she does some live ones. And she did one with Bradley Cooper back in February. And it was a very similar theme. One of the questions she had asked him was, how do you feel about not being nominated as Best Director? Are you proud of your project? Are you upset by the fact that you didn't get that validation, that reward from people, that you weren't in that list of 5 folks? And his response was very beautifully kind of along the lines of what you're saying. He said, the validation that I needed was creating it. Creating the art was coming to the table with something I felt really great about. And the awards and the reviews and people loving it are gravy. It's the work that I did that is the thing that sustains me and makes me feel as though that's the important part. And Good work on the haikus. I think that a lot of times it's hard for people to understand that coaches need to coach ourselves, and we also need coaches.
God, yeah.
And to be able to, again, pull up and see that in yourself and be willing to share it outwardly, right? There's a lot of people that, yeah, this vulnerability moment happened, but they're not always comfortable sharing that. Especially, you mentioned dipping your toe in the water, right? So you're creating your own content in those haikus. It's very different than repurposing a meme and adding something, which I think is absolutely, I found myself cackling so hard, by the way, at your memes. But the haiku is creative expression. It's the beauty that you're bringing through your voice and your story that you're putting out there. And there is some added risk happening there. So I think it's just so beautiful that you did that. So thank you for sharing that with the world.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So I would love to hear a little bit. I feel like I wanted to go into the Enneagram a bit because I wanted people to kind of get on the same language of at least what we were talking about. But I'd love to pull back and hear a little bit about the times where you have felt other. You referenced it a little bit in your intro, but I, as you know, have found so much power in these stories. And so anything you're willing to share would be wonderful for me personally, selfishly, and then also for our audience. I know they truly appreciate them.
Yeah, for sure. So this is such an interesting question because once I thought about it, I realized that I've actually felt, quote, other my whole life. And I didn't really have words to describe that. So starting with my ethnicity. So my dad is a brown-skinned man from Trinidad, which is an island off the coast of Venezuela. And he immigrated here when he was 19. And then my mom is an Irish redhead. So on all of those forms you fill out in life that ask you, are you white, Caucasian, are you Hispanic? I was like, but why are you trying to make me choose between my two identities?
Yes.
And, you know, there's not one that says I'm mixed ethnicity. And that was always a bother for me. And I also grew up in a town that was predominantly white, went to Bentley, which is arguably predominantly white.
Oh, yeah.
Moved to New Hampshire, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is 100% white, while having this experience of having a Hispanic last name and absolutely passing and being a white girl, but then feeling this other part that's like, well, where is there room for me to embrace this other culture that exists in my heritage? So I would say moving to Oakland, California, which is the most diverse, has been just a wonderful experience for me to walk around every single day and just see all walks of life, both gender and socioeconomic diversity. It's so diverse and it's so different from anything I've experienced that I feel really at home here. The other thing I would say more broadly is that I've always felt that I didn't quite measure up, that I wasn't worthy of the opportunity that I've been afforded. So I've always felt like I needed to prove myself that I have the right to be here. So a couple of examples of that are in college when people were like, oh, where did you go to high school? And I was like, I was homeschooled. And then graduated college and people are like, where did you go to school, especially on the West Coast? And I'm like, Bentley. And people are like, oh, you didn't go to Stanford? Well, that sucks for you. And then I worked in a consulting firm and they're like, which one? And I said, this one. And then they're like, oh, okay, not Bain or BCG. And I'm like, nope. And then they're like, where did you go to B school? And I'm like, I didn't go to B school. And it's like so on and so forth. And my experience of otherness is always feeling like I've never had quite the right credentials. And I've had to work harder than everyone else to prove that I have the right to be here amongst all of the more credentialed people.
Oh, I feel like, girl, why did we not talk about any of this in college?
No, seriously, I just want to say that when I listened to your first podcast where your cousin was interviewing you, my thought was, I want to hang out with Nikki. She sounds really cool. It seems like we're all on the same level about the way that we see the world. So,
as long as we have the Enneagram conversation first, then we can hang out. Now, the beauty with which you just express so many of the aspects of the part of your life that you're answering the question of who you are. It just sounded like with the way you talked about that, I heard the silent other side of the questions that were being asked you. And it feels like when you went to networking events and people were trying to feel you out and see if you were viable enough to talk to longer, to build into their network. And it's like, I'm a human. I am viable enough. And so are you. One of the things that I always talk about is how those particular situations are very difficult for me networking situations. If you met me in one, you wouldn't think it was difficult. But how we operate is a lot of times and Bentley taught us this nicely too, is to really pay attention to what's on the name tag, right? And instead of going top to bottom on the name tag, you go bottom to top. You say, where did you work? Okay, that's a good enough company, right? Or where did you go to school? Cool, good enough. I'm interested enough to see where you are next. What level are you? Oh, okay, this is a beneficial thing for me. And then maybe I'll get to your name. I'll probably go to your last name first, then I'll get to your first name. And then so there's a part of this that is just so reverse engineered. And this feeling of I'm not enough by just being who I am. And I have to explain it to you. And I have to work harder. And I have to prove myself, though I have done everything that's needed, right? I've done everything that's needed for me to be a student at the school. I've done everything that's needed for me to get this job. When I worked at Bain & Company and then I worked at Bain Capital, and yes, okay, people knew those places, but people didn't know Bentley. And because I wasn't on the investment side, it was one of those things that was like, oh, I mean, cool, you work there, but you're not really bringing in money for the business. It's like, well, what do you think marketing does? There is this part of the way that we interact with each other. Yes, there are very kind of visual ways, and there are very specific metrics with which we use to say you are viable or you can pass to the next level. But I think there's a part of just how we interact with each other that is this are you enough question, whether we know that's what we're asking or not. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's so important. And it's crazy how common that feeling that we have of being the only person that's been told you're not enough is. Yeah. That like really, if we all banded together, what would happen? That we were like, you know what? If you don't fit and you're not enough, come over here. You belong here. Imagine what that group would look like and be like.
Yeah, it's like the 99%.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I will say my hope in this world, my fingers are crossed. You can't see me. I'm literally crossing both fingers. And if I knew how to cross the toes, I'd probably do that too. That like there is this shift in our demographics, right? There's a shift that the predominant culture that has led us to this point is no longer going to be statistically the majority. And obviously we feel that in the way the world's working right now. There's that friction. There's that kind of the rubbing of change. But there is a part where we do have the ability, those who are not enough have a place for their voice to be heard. And we also have the benefit of knowing how to speak other languages. So those who don't have to worry if they're enough in certain ways can understand where we're coming from. So there's some beauty in that too.
Well, yeah, and I also think that there's this other conversation around credibility versus credential. Ooh. And credential means that somebody else told you that you are worthy, you are enough, and it's written on a piece of paper. And credibility actually means the quality of being believed as true. And so that's something that I've really struggled with, and to some degree still struggle with, of I am credible because of the reputation that I have built through my own blood, sweat, and tears, but I don't have the credential on a piece of paper in many ways that would affirm from a third party that I am credible.
Yes.
And I've had to push through that and move forward on my own credibility, which was a whole thing when I was launching my life coaching business. And turned out to not matter whatsoever. Literally not a single person ever asked me, well, what's your credential? Right. It was like, hey, I know you, or I know someone who knows you, and I know that you are really good at creating safe spaces for me to process and overcome self-limiting narratives. Like, that's the thing that they care about. And it's kind of an interesting thing where it's me self-limiting because I'm taking on the culturally habituated way of being. And then me having to push back against that and say, that's not needed for me. That's not relevant for me.
Right. And they're not sticking around because of your receipts, right? They're not sticking around because of where you went to school either. So it's not even whatever box that is. It's the entry point that it's like, I know that I was told that that's the way this works, that I have to have these specific words on my resume, or I have to have these specific badges that go along with who I am and what I do. But then, okay, great, they've gotten in the door. They don't stick around because of those. They stick around because of what I can bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. And girl, I know a lot of people who have very credentialed resumes and add zero value.
Hey, I'm like, you said it, but I'm right there with you. My hands are up. I'm like, yes, girl. Yes. There's something to be said for that there's other ways for us to actually evaluate one another. So I would love to hear a little bit about, I know that there's a transition coming in your life from a move. I know you mentioned Oakland being such a wonderful place. I'd love to hear a little bit about that and kind of what the next iteration of Jess's life is looking like it might look like?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my husband is in the Coast Guard and he is getting transferred to Houston, Texas this summer. So after 8 wonderful years of being in the Bay Area, we will be moving to Texas. What that means is I'm not allowed to keep my job at Kaiser because Kaiser doesn't exist in Texas. And that's a huge bummer and was not something that I anticipated. I had it all worked out with my boss and my team that I would just work remotely until HR told me I wasn't allowed to do that. So I am now taking a 6-month sabbatical before I return to Kaiser in a part-time capacity as a contractor. Because labor law, you got to take 6 months off before you can become a contractor. So in that 6-month sabbatical, I will be creating my own business plan and launching my Enneagram executive coaching and training practice and getting that started in Texas. It's kind of a bummer in some sense that I'm getting all of this reputation and referrals in the Bay Area because that's not necessarily transferable to Texas, but I'm hoping that having that dedicated time to do marketing and network and whatever will provide a good launching pad for when I come out of my sabbatical and I'm ready to work on a more full-time basis. So one door is closing, which is my current dream job, but it's opening up this new opportunity to pursue this passion I have in a more intentional and time-honoring way.
I feel like when we first spoke, I don't even know if the HR conversation had happened, but that is the blessing and a curse at the same time. It's like, thank you so much for giving me 6 months to dive into this business that I thought was going to be an add-on. But the idea of having to kind of rebuild, I mean, this is a professional network, but this happens for people that move to new places all the time, right? To build your network of friends, of coworkers, of contacts in a new place. It's a daunting task, but I personally, just hearing your story and also knowing you, I don't want to discount what it will be, but I think you're going to be pretty damn good at it. Yeah, I think there is some beauty in the way that you utilize your story and your expertise that can connect people, whether they're right in Texas or they're virtually around the world. I think there's a part of the way that you express yourself that really does do a great job of connecting. Can you talk a little bit about the Enneagram, the trainings that you have done at Kaiser and in the Bay Area, and what that looks like, how people go through that process? And it sounds like they're going through that process at work, how those trainings play out.
Yeah, for sure. So what your coach did with you is not something that I typically recommend. And most teachers don't recommend taking a test because the tests are only 60% accurate. And the reason is because the test can only measure your behavior and characteristics. It can't measure your motivation. And the Enneagram type is based on your core motivation. So when people take a test, they often glom on to whatever the test tells them that they are. And then they start seeing themselves in that personality type or in that Enneagram type. And it becomes part of their identity. And the problem with that is the growth path for one type might be the opposite of the growth path for another type. So let's say you are an Enneagram 2 and your propensity is to exclusively focus on what other people need and forget yourself. Your growth path would be to be a little bit more selfish or self-interested. But if you're an Enneagram 4, then your propensity is to be very self-focused. So your growth path is to be other-focused. So if you confuse yourself as a 2 and you're really a 4, you're going to be doing the exact opposite work you should be doing.
Right. And feeding into the unhealthy part.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that's why it matters. So typically the best way to learn about the Enneagram and ascertain your type is hearing about all of the types from somebody who actually knows about the Enneagram. And that's more in like a workshop or training capacity. Or you can take a test, but then hold that result very lightly and then do more of a deep dive into reading about all of the elements of that type and being honest with yourself about whether those are actually true or not. Sometimes people have an idea of a particular type and they really want to be that type. And so they just take that type on and say that that's what they are. or they feel really resistant to another type. And so they're like, I couldn't possibly be that, even though that resistance is a piece of information that's telling them that something is resonating and they just don't want it to, but that doesn't make it any less true. So the workshops that I lead, typically I prefer to do a whole day, because just doing the overview of what the Enneagram is and a high level overview of each of the 9 types takes like 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
And then you really want to do at least one exercise that helps to make all of that head knowledge that people learned a little bit more tangible. And it creates space for other people to share how they have experienced that type, which is just more learning for all of the people in the room. So I typically do 3 to 4 hours on overview and then a deep dive into a particular topic, like how does each type communicate? How does each type respond to conflict? You know, how does each type want to receive feedback, etc. And it's this catch-22 thing where some people feel that that is just way too much content, and other people are like, I want to spend days doing this.
Like, can we talk tomorrow?
Yeah. So what I would say is that if you're looking for a quick fix to just take a test and have somebody tell you who you are, the Enneagram is not the right for you. But if you are looking to embark on truly a lifelong journey of understanding yourself and other people on a very deep and nuanced level and do the work it takes to be your best self, then the Enneagram is an incredibly powerful tool for doing that.
I'm wondering, do you feel as though the Enneagram, because I know you mentioned a couple of the other tests that are out there, do you think that it's something that is complementary, or it should be taken in its own space as its own experience? As people are doing a self-exploration journey, just from an accessibility perspective, it might not be something where you have the ability to dive into a whole day workshop, right? So is there some way for those who are in the space of more of a self-help journey than being able to necessarily either afford financially or just from a time perspective to be able to hop into something like that? I'm assuming your coaching goes into that, so that's why I'm talking a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, I would say a couple of things. One of the most accessible things you can do is just listen to podcasts on it. 2 that I would recommend, The Road Back to You, which is a primer on the Enneagram, and then Typology, which goes a little bit into more of the complexities of each type. Or you can read the book, The Essential Enneagram, which is, again, a very high-level primer of each of the types, and do more of your own learning. The work that I do, one-on-one coaching, starts with a typing interview to really get down to this is your actual type, and then moves into what is the thing that you were trying to achieve or become or have or whatever, and then what are the self-limiting behaviors that are type specific that are taking you in the opposite direction of where you're actually trying to go. And then in terms of your actual question of how do the other personality typing systems relate and complement, I think that I could probably do an overlay of each Enneagram type and what their strengths finders would likely say, or which disc profile they would have, or which MBTI they fall into, because all of those, again, are just describing characteristics and behaviors. And there's overlap in some of the behaviors and characteristics of each Enneagram type. And so people can get confused because they're like, oh, I'm super driven, I must be a 3. But 1s are really driven, 7s are really driven, but they're just driven for a different motivating reason. Okay. So I think it's always, anytime that you can become more aware of the way that you show up in the world and the way that other people experience you, that's super helpful, but you just don't want to get stuck there. Yeah. Right? So I'm an ENTJ on Myers-Briggs, and according to that type, that box, I am a leader who is very driven and will stop at nothing to achieve success, including stomping on anybody who gets in my way. And when I read that, I was like, that's really mean. But the thing is, could I be that when I'm unhealthy? Absolutely. Right. Is that the way that I walk around in the world? Not really. I've done a lot of work to overcome that way of being. And so I think it's really important when you learn about these behaviors and characteristics to not use it as an excuse for being a shittier version of yourself, right? Right. Yeah. Like, okay. It's just the way I am, right? That's fine. Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's not the Enneagram. in particular is not an excuse for being a particular way. It's saying, here is what my propensity is, but here is the choice that I have to do something else, choose something else. There's a beautiful quote that says, between stimulus and response, there is space. And in that space is the power to choose our response. And the Enneagram is an incredible tool to elongate that space between when you get triggered or when you experience something and how you actually respond.
Wow. In a lot of the diversity and inclusion trainings that I do, there's the awareness and reflection and the behavior change. And I love that quote. I feel like takes it to a whole nother level. I really like that a lot. So one question that I'm super eager to ask you after all this, because I feel like it's going to be a juicy answer. If there was one thing you could change about the world right now, what would it be? Just a really light question.
No big deal. I would say that I would significantly ratchet up the level of compassion that people have for other people so that we could all see and value the inherent worth that human beings have.
Oh, that was such a good succinct answer. Mine is like, and blah, 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 blah. And you're just like, yep, got it. Here you go. I feel like you want to run? You want to run for office? You've got it. You've got your platform.
Well, I just think that so much of the ugliness in the world is because we have devalued the humanity of people, right? We view them as ways that we can get more power, ways that we can dominate, ways that we can just use them for our own purposes and then toss them aside when they no longer serve our purposes. And if we could only see other people as inherently worthy of love and respect, then that would change so many things.
Yes. I feel like you are sending me off to the rest of the day in like the absolutely perfect way. It's like, you know what? Let's be more wonderfully connected, loving humans. How about it? I think
how about it? It's totally possible.
Oh, well, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time today. This was amazing. I feel like I have so much more work to do on my own Enneagram journey. I feel like I need to go back and listen to the podcasts, talk more to you, and really get to know myself and others a lot more deeply than I thought I already did. So, got more work to do.
I would love to talk with you more about your Enneagram type.
Perfect.
May or may not be what you think it is.
I know. I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh, crap. It's like I've been wearing the wrong outfit all day. It's been inside out and upside down. I'm like, crap. All right, well, gotta go fix that one. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much, Jess.
Thanks, Nikki. Appreciate it.